My 47-year-old husband, on his deathbed, chose to confess to me. He said the daughter we raised was not my child, but his sister-in-law's. Back then, while I was unconscious after childbirth, he swapped my baby with his sister-in-law's child. But his sister-in-law's child developed a high fever at the age of 6, and due to delayed medical treatment, suffered brain damage. Perhaps my expression was truly dreadful. He wept bitterly, repented, and said he was sorry to me, promising that if there were a next life, he would still want to marry me and spend a lifetime making it up to me. He's already schemed against me for a lifetime, yet he dares to think of a next life? Only the useless would pin their hopes on a non-existent rebirth and vengeance in another life. As for me, I usually settle scores on the spot. And besides, after all these years, hasn't he noticed? In what way does the child resemble him or his sister-in-law? Zane shut himself in the study as soon as he returned from the hospital with the test results, staying there the entire afternoon without coming out. I knew he was upset, so I didn't disturb him. Before long, the doorbell rang. When I answered it, Zane's sister-in-law, Lydia, was standing outside, with her daughter trailing behind her, the girl who had become intellectually disabled after suffering a high fever at the age of 6. Lydia frowned, and her first words to me were, "Is Serena back?" Serena is my daughter. She's 22 this year and still in college. I shook my head, no. What's wrong? Lydia ignored me. She elbowed past me into the living room, acting familiar as if she were back in her own home. I pulled Sophie, who was standing at the door, inside as well, only to turn and see Lydia sitting on the sofa with her arms crossed, watching us. "Fiona, from my angle, you and Sophie do look somewhat alike." Her gaze was unfriendly, her lips curling into a half-smile. I didn't respond. This wasn't the first time she had said Sophie looked like me. We weren't related by blood. How could her biological daughter possibly resemble me? I had just sat down opposite Lydia when she impatiently continued pressing, "Zane is already like this, and you still plan to keep it from Serena?" Zane's test results had only been in hand for a little over 2 hours. How did Lydia find out everything so quickly? Before I could answer, the study door opened. Zane, who had locked himself in his room since returning, finally stepped out. His gaze landed on Lydia, his lips parting slightly, but the word sister-in-law ultimately remained unspoken. Today's follow-up report confirmed Zane's diagnosis: advanced-stage lung cancer with symptoms of metastasis and spread, having missed the optimal treatment window. He has only a few months left to live. After a moment of eye contact, Lydia spoke first. "Zane, I still think we shouldn't keep this from Serena. She is your daughter, don't you agree?" She emphasized the words "your daughter." Zane remained silent for a long while before replying, "We shouldn't hide it from her." They exchanged words, occasionally locking eyes, completely oblivious to my presence. I pretended not to notice. Even in my youth, I wouldn't have cared. What's the point of getting worked up over a dying man now? Zane had almost no relatives left by his side. His parents and older brother had long passed away, and aside from our daughter and me, there was only his sister-in-law Lydia and niece Sophie. As Zane was about to call Serena, I stepped forward to stop him. "Serena's summer break starts in just 2 weeks, it can wait a few more days." After a moment's thought, Zane nodded and put his phone away. Lydia's expression darkened as she shot me a sidelong glance. "You're quite the controlling mother, aren't you?" she remarked. I smiled and said, "As parents, how could we not think of our children?" "That's true," she hinted meaningfully. "What a pity about the fool in my family. Even if I wanted to make plans for her, it wouldn't do any good." Sophie sat beside me, playing with her fingers absent-mindedly, completely carefree, a stark contrast to her mother's scheming eyes. "That sounds nice, but what has she ever planned for Sophie?" A young woman in her 20s with a buzz cut, wearing ill-fitting clothes, her face and body tanned dark, she doesn't look the least bit like a girl at all. Zane walked over and sat on the same side of the sofa as Lydia, leaving a one-person gap between them. With everyone present, I asked Zane, "How do you want to proceed with treatment?" Zane pinched the bridge of his nose, looking utterly exhausted. "Haven't figured it out yet." His complexion was terrible. Ever since the diagnosis, it was as if all the life had been drained from him. Lydia kept her head down, fiddling with her phone, seemingly oblivious to our conversation. Perhaps to prevent patients from losing their will to live, doctors' words always tend to be ambiguous. He wouldn't directly tell patients that their illness is incurable, nor would he claim it can definitely be cured. Instead, he gives patients the illusion that with proper treatment, there might still be hope for recovery. Zayn has been deceived by this illusion. Over the years of doing business, he has accumulated some savings. If he decides to pursue treatment, the later expenses wouldn't be a major issue. At this point in the conversation, Lydia suddenly chimed in, "I think we should stick to conservative treatment. That way, there wouldn't be too much suffering." Zayn's face turned even grayer. To him, conservative treatment must be equivalent to giving up. While he normally listens to Lydia, when it comes to matters of his own life, things are different. No matter how much one usually boasts about not fearing death, when truly facing the brink of death, there is always an innate fear of the unknown. When that unknown fear is magnified, it creates an overwhelming desire to survive. Lydia said she wanted to stay at my place, claiming she was worried I couldn't take care of Zayn alone and that as his sister-in-law, she should stay and help. Zayn didn't say anything but turned to look at me, as if seeking my opinion. I still have work to do, and I was originally planning to hire a caregiver for Zayn. When Lydia volunteered herself, I really had no reason to refuse. "Then I'll trouble you, sister-in-law." Lydia pouted her lips, "We're all family here, no need to be so polite." True to her word, Lydia didn't stand on ceremony. That evening, she lounged on the sofa applying a face mask while binge-watching dramas, yet still found time to boss me around to bathe her daughter. She said, "I can't even remember how long it's been since little Silly had a bath. Fiona, could you just give her a quick wash?" Sophie was watching TV, where a Tom and Jerry chase scene had her giggling for ages. I still remember how smart and adorable this child was before the age of 6. Now, looking at her like this, it's just her fate to have such a mother. Sophie and Serena were born on the same day, with Serena being 3 hours older than Sophie. Sophie hadn't finished watching cartoons yet and struggled, unwilling to come with me. Lydia shot her a disgusted look and shouted, "Go take a bath." I could clearly feel Sophie's body trembling violently. She crouched down, covered her head, and let out a loud scream. It was a stress reaction from being frequently beaten. The noise in the living room was too loud, and Zayn also came out of his room. He glanced at Sophie, who was squatting on the floor hugging her head and still screaming, then looked at Lydia with some impatience. "Why are you yelling at her?" Lydia let out a cold snort. "I really regret not strangling her at birth." While saying these words, she kept glancing at me several times. From start to finish, I remained on the sidelines with a cold and detached gaze. Lydia only had Sophie as her child in this lifetime. How she chooses to raise her child is her own business, no one else has the right to interfere. When Zayn's friends heard he was ill, they came to visit in droves. With so many people at home for meals, it was inconvenient, so I arranged a nearby hotel. Those who came were all longtime friends who had collaborated with Zayn for years. Mindful of Zayn's condition, they only brought up topics that would cheer him up and reminisced about some fun memories from the past. During this time, I noticed someone named Tyson seemed to know Lydia. Their eyes met several times, as if exchanging unspoken messages through their expressions. Tyson didn't leave much of an impression on me. He had only started associating with Zayn a few years ago, and their friendship didn't seem particularly deep. Even Zayn was surprised by his attendance today. I observed them discreetly. At one point, Lydia stepped out, and Tyson quickly followed, excusing himself to go to the restroom. They weren't the only ones who left the dining table, as several other friends had stepped out during that time, so their departure didn't raise any suspicion. The two returned nearly 20 minutes later, one after the other. After coming back this time, Tyson was clearly in a much better mood. He became more talkative and, whether intentionally or not, ended up bringing up the topic of property. The atmosphere at the table grew heavy because of this subject. The smile completely vanished from Zayn's face, and his hand gripping the chopsticks trembled slightly uncontrollably. The friend sitting next to Tyson jokingly nudged him, trying to lighten the mood. Why bring that up? Zane's got plenty of luck and vitality ahead of him. As soon as these words were spoken, immediate agreement arose. Seeing the atmosphere take a positive turn, Lydia suddenly said, "He isn't wrong, Zane. If not for others, shouldn't you at least think about the child?" When she said others, her gaze flickered over me, oozing malice. Zane and I both set down our chopsticks simultaneously. There was no way this meal could continue. At the dinner table, I had 2 glasses of wine and went to bed early. I don't know how long I slept before I was roused by faint arguing. Lydia and Zane were in a dispute, whether in the living room or the study, it wasn't clear. I cracked open the door slightly and heard Serena's name mentioned, along with something about a will. What? Does Lydia also want Zane to include her in his will for a share of the property? Over the years, Zane and I have each had our own careers. Outside of work, he also partnered with some friends on various business ventures. Whether he made any money from them, I wouldn't know. After all, we never discussed income with each other. Household expenses and Serena's needs were always shared between us. I knew Zane had been secretly supporting Lydia. With a child whose mental capacity remained that of a 5 or 6-year-old, Lydia genuinely couldn't work. For all these years, I chose to pretend I didn't know anything about it. The next day, Zane said he had made up his mind, he would follow the treatment plan the doctor proposed. This was expected. I simply replied, "All right." After a moment of silence, Zane added, "Fiona, I want to draft a will." I walked over and held his hand. "Zane, don't overthink it. Let's just follow the doctor's treatment plan. We're not at that point yet." Zane's eyes reddened, something rarely seen. He still insisted on making a will. He said we only had Serena as our child and wanted to leave all his assets to her, asking if I had any objections. Lydia interjected sarcastically from the side, "Serena is her daughter. Why would she have any objections?" As she said this, her eyes were evasive, not daring to meet my gaze. I chuckled, "Yes, Serena is my daughter, so of course I have no objections." Hearing this, Zane and Lydia visibly relaxed. During this period when Zane was actively receiving treatment, he was also consulting lawyers about drafting a will. In just half a month, he had lost most of his hair, and his complexion was visibly deteriorating. I hired a caregiver to assist Lydia in taking care of Zane. Lydia said she would help take care of Zane, but she's used to her freedom, how could she possibly stay at the hospital? Moreover, it seems she's recently taken a lover, and the two of them are inseparable, completely wrapped up in each other. Not only did she not come to the hospital to care for Zane, but she also dumped Sophie on him and the nurse. The nurse was naturally unhappy about it and complained to me, so I increased his salary. After all, the money for hiring the nurse was paid by Zane. When I didn't see Lydia at the hospital for the 3rd time, I asked Zane, "Has your sister-in-law not come to the hospital these past few days?" Zane had already lost a lot of weight, his face was sallow, and his hair had thinned so much that he looked like an old man, nothing like his confident self before the illness. He shook his head, as if unwilling to talk much about Lydia. Lydia had been finding one lover after another over the years, and it wasn't that Zane didn't know about it. But he simply had no right to stop her. Now, he didn't even have the will or the strength to care. I sat by the hospital bed and brought him 2 pieces of good news. The doctor said you can be discharged tomorrow, and Serena will be back tomorrow too. Hearing this, Zane finally relaxed. He had long been tired of staying in the hospital and had been waiting for Serena's return. On the day Serena returned, Lydia, who hadn't been back for over a week, also showed up. Serena, who had just returned and learned that her father was seriously ill, cried for a long time in Zane's arms, while Zane also teared up but continued to comfort her. Lydia stood nearby, unusually at a loss, just like Zane, comforting Serena the whole time, looking at her as if she were her own daughter. Serena wiped away her tears and then took Lydia's hand, saying, "Auntie, I heard you've been busy taking care of my dad all this time. Thank you for all your hard work." Lydia beamed with joy. "Oh, silly girl, we're all family here. What's there to thank for?" The three of them stood together, looking more like a family of three, while Sophie and I seemed like outsiders. During the 2 months Serena was home for summer vacation, Lydia also rarely went out. She and Serena would take care of Zayn together. I often saw the three of them chatting and laughing together, and Zayn's gaze frequently lingered on the two of them, his eyes filled with contentment. Time flew by quickly. After Serena started school again, Lydia also left my home and only visited occasionally. Zayn's spirits grew worse day by day, and he lost all his hair during the 2nd month of chemotherapy. Serena bought him all kinds of wigs and hats. Most of the time, Zayn just glanced at them and rarely wore them, as he hardly went out anymore. The severe weight loss and the pain caused by his illness made him increasingly reluctant to move. I always felt that the way Zayn looked at me lately was growing more and more off, almost as if he had done something wrong by me. But what could he possibly have done to wrong me? He had already made a will, leaving all his property to my daughter Serena. 3 months later, Zayn, who couldn't even drink water, suddenly said he was hungry, and his spirits seemed to improve abruptly. The caregiver quickly called me to come and see him. Both she and I knew Zayn was experiencing the symptoms of a final rally. Before this, I had used a business trip as an excuse and hadn't visited him for over half a month. When I saw Zayn, I was still shocked for a moment. In just half a month, he had become so emaciated that he was practically just skin and bones. I sat in the caregiver's chair by Zayn's bed and asked him how he was feeling. Zayn held my hand, his face so thin it was barely more than skin stretched over bone, managing a faint smile. I feel much better. It's like the strength I lost before has come back to me. This must be the so-called deathbed rally, when all the organs seem to conspire together for one final effort. How could Zayn not know his own condition? He gazed at me for a long time before tears suddenly welled up in his eyes. Then I heard him say, "Fiona, I'm so sorry." His grip on my hand tightened, though he had little strength left to begin with. To me, it merely felt like he was holding my hand more firmly. Zayn said, "If I don't tell you these words, I won't be able to rest in peace even in death." This piqued my curiosity. "Zayn, you didn't do anything to betray me, did you?" Zayn avoided my gaze and, after a long pause, finally admitted, "Fiona. Serena is actually my child with Lydia. Back then, while you were unconscious after giving birth, I switched the two babies." My vision went black for a moment, and it took me a long while to regain my voice. "Are you saying Sophie is actually my daughter?" Zayn lowered his head, not daring to look at me or respond. "But, how could that be possible?" "When Serena was 12, we did a paternity test, and the results confirmed she was my biological child. I always knew Zayn disliked me. Back when his brother and my late husband died together in a mining accident, rumors circulated about him and his sister-in-law. After my husband's death, my mother-in-law drove me back to my parents' home. She cursed me as a husband killer, blaming me for the death of her son. The statement was utterly ridiculous. It was she who had arranged the job at the coal mine through connections, yet in the end, she blamed everything on me. I had only stayed at my parents' home for a few days when my sister-in-law started slamming things around and giving me dirty looks, speaking with sarcasm. My mother, afraid of this fierce-tempered sister-in-law, simply advised me to remarry quickly while I was still young. It was around that time that Zayn's family sent a matchmaker to propose. That year, Zayn was already 25, and his family was genuinely so poor they couldn't put food on the table. No decent family would willingly marry their daughter into such a household. When the matchmaker came to propose, my mother didn't hesitate much before agreeing. Originally, she had thought of asking for some bride price, but upon seeing my belly, she ultimately couldn't bring herself to open her mouth. Before getting married, I told Zayn the truth. I had only discovered I was pregnant after my husband's death. It was understandable if Zayn couldn't accept it. After hesitating for a long time, Zayn still agreed to marry me. Back then, his family had a poor reputation in the village. His father had passed away early, his mother suffered from a chronic illness and relied on medication year-round, and now even his elder brother was gone. The villagers said the feng shui of his family's ancestral grave was bad, which was why life was so hard for them. If Zayn didn't marry me, he might very well have ended up a bachelor for life. Zayn and I didn't even have a wedding banquet. He just pinned a red flower on a borrowed car, drove me from my home to his, and that counted as us getting married. It wasn't until after marriage that I found out about the affair between Zayn and his sister-in-law Lydia. By then, I realized I'd been deceived, but there was nothing I could do. I didn't have a single penny to my name, and my parents wouldn't take me back. Leaving Zayn meant I had nowhere to go. I muddled through each passing day until I was over 2 months pregnant, just when Lydia also got a positive pregnancy test. Back then, I did the math over and finally understood, there was a high probability that Lydia's child was Zayn's. I'd never harbored ill will toward others, so why was it that everyone around me kept scheming against me? A dying man's words are sincere. Zayn rambled on and on, repenting for the foolish things he did in his youth. Did he truly regret doing all these things? Of course not. He was merely hoping that if there really are judges in the underworld, his sins might be weighed a little lighter. Zayn's tears fell drop by drop onto the back of my hand. Choking back sobs, he could barely speak. Fiona, I wronged you and Sophie. If there's a next life, can I marry you again? I'd spend my whole life making it up to you both. He schemed against me his entire life, paving the way for Lydia even in his final moments. How could someone like him dare, to speak of a next life with me? I pulled my hand from his grasp, wiping each finger with a wet wipe. So, you wrote a will leaving all your property to Serena, just because you knew Serena is actually your biological daughter? Zayn started using his old tactic of silence against me. When we had occasional arguments in our younger years, he would do exactly this, stay completely silent, subjecting me to emotional neglect. You've been scheming for over 20 years, turning my daughter into a fool, and leaving everything to the child you had with your sister-in-law. Given this, how can you possibly believe I would forgive you? Zayn? Zayn closed his eyes, his expression pained. Fiona, can't you find it in your heart, seeing as I'm about to die? Why did you do this to me? I interrupted him. Back then, I clearly asked for your opinion. I said if you couldn't accept the child, we didn't have to get married or could consider an abortion. It was you who agreed to let me keep her. Zayn didn't answer my question, stubbornly fixated only on seeking my forgiveness. He said he was dying, and if I didn't forgive him, he wouldn't rest in peace. But if those things were already done, why fear not resting in peace? I asked him, Zayn, if I were the one who swapped the children, would you forgive me? Zayn's clouded gaze lingered on me, and he answered almost without hesitation, yes, Fiona. I know I've wronged you in this lifetime. No matter what you do, I would forgive you. I felt relieved hearing his words. I forced a cold smile. Sophie's high fever when she was 6, it could have been cured, right? Because Lydia always thought Sophie was my daughter, she didn't send Sophie to the hospital in time. She wished Sophie would die. Later, the doctor said Sophie had a high chance of living independently if she received rehabilitation therapy. Both Zayn and I were there then, and Lydia even asked for Zayn's opinion. What did Zayn say? Zayn showed a reluctant expression but said, if she can't recover to be normal, then there's no need to waste time and money. It's all this child's fate. They thought Sophie was my child, saying it was all fate when the child turned out to be slow. But what if Sophie had been their child all along? Outside the door, there was the sound of the caregiver talking to someone. It seemed someone had arrived, yet for some reason they didn't come in. I stared at Zayn, trying to see through his flesh into what was really going through his mind. Zayn, back when you said you wanted to marry me, I actually thought about it a lot. I believed that if you truly treated me well, I would definitely build a good life with you. As expected, I never feared hardship. Even though Zayn's family was dirt poor, I still managed to pull through bit by bit with Zayn. Zayn lowered his head, his gaunt face now devoid of any expression. But you schemed against me, once and then again, even my child wasn't spared. I drove each word straight into his heart like a knife. Zayn, I raised Serena for over 20 years. Lydia never raised her for a single day. Didn't it ever occur to you that she might refuse to acknowledge Lydia and only recognize me as her mother? Zane lifted his head and looked at me calmly. Fiona, I know you'll curse me for saying this, but Serena is mine and Lydia's biological daughter. She carries our blood. That bond runs deep in her bones. He said, Lydia told Serena long ago. They recognized each other as mother and daughter during Serena's second year of high school. As soon as his words fell, the ward door was pushed open, and Lydia, who had eavesdropped long enough outside, walked into the ward. Fiona, she said with a triumphant smile, now that you know everything, it's time to return my daughter Serena to me. Of course, you can take your little fool with you anytime. Seeing my silence, she continued, raising her has been no easy task all these years. You know fools are much harder to handle than normal people. She looks at me as if I'm a fool, that's how she's always looked at me all these years. But who the real fool is, only I truly know. Living among them, I had the illusion that I was the only sober one in a world intoxicated. That's why I've endured them again and again, I knew that only by letting them act arrogantly could I have the last laugh. But now, there's no need to endure any more. I asked them, you've always said Serena is your biological daughter, but have you ever done a paternity test? Zane and Lydia froze. Lydia looked at me with disdain. When Zane took the baby over, I was there too. What's the point of testing? I believe one shouldn't leave this world with regrets, especially Zane, after all, we were once husband and wife. So, I took out the copies of the paternity test I always carried in my bag, tossing one to Lydia and the other to Zane. What is this? Lydia casually flipped through it, but upon seeing Serena's name, she looked utterly disbelieving and immediately turned to the last page. How is this possible? The paternity test results showed that Serena and I were biologically related. I kindly explained to them, when Serena was 12, I already took her for a paternity test. What? Haven't you ever done one with Sophie? Zane was also stunned. His muddled mind couldn't process it for the longest time, and he just murmured, I clearly swapped the babies. He did swap the babies, but later I swapped them back. How could I not be wary of a man who was already involved with his sister-in-law before marriage? After learning that he married me just to cover up his dirty affairs with his sister-in-law, I became even more cautious of both of them. Staring at the two of them, utterly stunned and almost dumbfounded, I continued to twist the knife in their hearts. You two are truly heartless, treating your own daughter like that. How does it feel to have ruined your own child, turning her into an idiot? If Lydia had treated Sophie properly, how could a perfectly fine young girl like Sophie have ended up as an idiot? At first, seeing how they treated Sophie, I couldn't bear it. But then I realized they treated her that way because they thought she was my daughter. In that instant, all my pity vanished. Mercy to the enemy is cruelty to oneself. All of Zane's vitality finally drained away. He slumped on the hospital bed, eyes wide open, with nothing left but his final breath. I was somewhat confused. Weren't you just repenting for having wronged me? You even said you'd repay me in the next life. Now you don't have to repent anymore, you owe me nothing. Aren't you happy? And besides, I asked you just now, if it were me who switched the babies, you said you'd forgive me. You even said you'd forgive me no matter what I did. Zane was now speechless. His eyes lost focus, staring blankly into the void, though his lips still quivered slightly, as if murmuring something. Lydia finally snapped out of her daze. She lunged at Zane, gripping the front of his hospital gown with both hands, her words coming out in a frantic, incoherent rush. Zane, the will, we need to redo it, the lawyer, yes, contact the lawyer first. She frantically searched for her phone to make a call. As I watched Zane's pupils dilate, I uttered the final words I had prepared for him, you can't do too many bad things, you'll face retribution. By the time Tyson arrived at the hospital with the lawyer, Zane had already taken his last breath. His eyes were wide open, and no matter how many times I tried, I couldn't close them. As he had said, if I didn't forgive him, he would never rest in peace. But in the end, I suppose he didn't need my forgiveness after all. Lydia somewhat incoherently explained the course of events to the lawyer, who then asked about some details and finally reviewed the paternity test report I had given to Lydia. He adjusted his glasses and said, "This DNA report is authentic. If what you say is true, then the will took effect the moment the testator established it. Now that the testator has passed away, the will cannot be altered." Lydia's voice cracked with despair, "But that's not his biological daughter. My daughter is his real child. How can the inheritance go to an outsider?" The lawyer still shook his head. Once Zane had established the will and explicitly designated Serena as the beneficiary, the estate would be distributed according to the will's stipulations, no longer adhering to the statutory order of inheritance. So, it's possible to leave the inheritance only to the children and not to the spouse by making a will. In other words, if there hadn't been that will initially, Lydia could have fought for a share of the inheritance using the paternity test reports of Sophie and Zane. The reason she was in a hurry to have Zane make a will back then was to prevent me, as the spouse, from taking half of the property when the time came. To be honest, I don't really care for Zane's wealth. I've been working all these years, and my salary is more than enough to support Serena and me. But who would say no to something that comes for free? She schemed this and that, but in the end, she ended up with nothing, while I, who never schemed at all, gained everything. Upon learning that Lydia hadn't acquired Zane's property, Tyson turned grim-faced, hurled a few curses at Lydia, and stormed off angrily. He had only been with Lydia for the sake of Zane's inheritance. Now that there was no hope left, he couldn't even bear to pretend for another second. Lydia still refused to believe it. She had lorded over me for most of her life and couldn't accept that all the good fortune had suddenly landed on me the moment Zane passed away. What she found hardest to accept was that Sophie was indeed her daughter. After all, no one knew better than she how she had treated Sophie over the past 20 years. She kept insisting on finding Serena, convinced that my paternity test was fake, and demanded to take another test with Serena. Serena had no objection to this. She remained kind in her attitude toward Lydia. "Auntie, you can arrange it, I'm free anytime these days." Lydia practically dragged Serena to the hospital in her eagerness. The expedited test report would be ready within 24 hours. Lydia was someone who wouldn't give up until she had no other choice. After receiving the paternity test report, she completely lost hope. After scheming tirelessly for half a lifetime, she ultimately ended up paving the way for me and my daughter. The sheer anger landed her straight in the hospital. I heard she had debts to pay outside and had been waiting for the inheritance to coax Serena into covering part of them. Now, all her plans have fallen through. It wasn't that Serena had a great capacity to accept things. I had already told her the whole truth when she was 12. Raised single-handedly by me, she had been instilled with resilience countless times, and this time, it truly came into play. I have to admit, Zane has always been very good to Serena, although this kindness likely stems largely from his belief that Serena is his biological daughter. So, at first, Serena found it somewhat difficult to accept. She was in low spirits for a long time. But after realizing the scheme Zane and Lydia had plotted against me, Serena chose to stand with me in the end. She said, "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. They shouldn't have treated you this way." In Serena's freshman year of high school, Lydia began secretly reaching out to her. Just as I suspected, Lydia believes Serena is her biological daughter. Now that Serena has grown up, she wants to reclaim her. Every time Lydia contacts Serena, Serena tells me about it. Sometimes Serena also can't understand. She asks me, "Mom, why didn't Dad marry Aunt back then?" I've thought about this too. After his brother died, he could have married his sister-in-law. Such things are rare, but not unheard of. It wasn't until later that I realized, because he couldn't stand the gossip in the village, and also, he wasn't as satisfied with Lydia as he had imagined. Deep down, Zane is actually very cowardly, which can be seen from the destitution of his family. A grown man should be able to carve out a path no matter where he goes, but he's simply content with the status quo. Actually, there's another reason Zane didn't marry Lydia. Back then, Zane's mother also disliked Lydia. Her eldest son was doing just fine with carpentry, but because Lydia complained he didn't earn enough and constantly fought with him, she ended up driving him to work in the mines. Zane's mother said the exact same words as my former mother-in-law. She claimed Lydia was a husband killer. Many women lost their husbands in that mining disaster, and many of those widowed women were burdened with the label of being husband killers. These shackles are imposed by one woman upon another. The pent-up emotions must find an outlet. Right and wrong, truth and lies, no words can describe them anymore. Zane's mother disliked me too, especially after learning I was pregnant. She was scornful, bluntly stating I must abort the child before stepping into her family's door. Later, I don't know what Zane said to her, but she stopped mentioning the abortion. She only insisted that after this birth, I must quickly have another child, Zane's own flesh and blood. Unfortunately, my body was too damaged from childbirth to conceive again. Back then, Zane said he would treat my child as his own. For a brief moment, I was touched, yet grateful that I never lost my head over love, no matter the circumstances. On the day I gave birth, Lydia fell in the courtyard. The child in her womb, which was not yet full term but had been claimed to be full term for a long time, was finally about to be born as well. Lydia and I were at the same hospital for delivery. At the time, I became wary. Lydia's fall seemed very suspicious. I felt as if she had specifically waited to give birth on the same day as me. I have always trusted my intuition, so I remained vigilant at all times. After giving birth, though I was exhausted to the point of barely being able to keep my eyes open, I bit the tip of my tongue to stay awake. I carefully examined my child, and only after spotting a red birthmark behind her earlobe did I allow myself to pass out from exhaustion. Just as I had suspected, when I woke up, Zane cheerfully placed the baby in my arms. Newborns all have scrunched up little faces that look more or less the same, but while Zane wasn't paying attention, I checked the baby's ears. There was no birthmark behind the child's ear. At that time, I began to doubt myself. Was the birthmark behind the child's earlobe just a dream I'd had? Fortunately, I'm not the type to dwell on doubts. If there's a suspicion, I act on it. Suppressing my pain, I asked Zane to hold the child and said I wanted to visit his sister-in-law. Zane was a bit reluctant, but he ultimately had to take care of both mothers-in-law, as his sister-in-law couldn't do without him either. In those days, giving birth usually meant staying in the hospital for just one day before going home. If my child had really been swapped, I would have to exchange them back before leaving the hospital. In those days, surveillance cameras were a rare sight. After confirming that Lydia's child indeed had a red birthmark behind the ear, I began planning how to swap the children back. There was only one opportunity to swap the children back, when we were heading home together. While Zane was helping Lydia out the door and into the car, I used the fastest speed I could muster in my life to switch the two children's swaddling blankets. Lydia still refused to give up. She sued me, determined to reclaim the inheritance Zane had left behind. I had Zane's will in my possession, how could she possibly succeed? Besides, Zane and Sophie had never undergone a paternity test. Later, she began playing the victim card, repeatedly coming to my house to cry and complain about how difficult it was for her to raise Sophie and how she needed money for Sophie's medical treatment. But Sophie's illness had already been neglected by her for far too long. One day, Serena read a book and joked with me, laughing, "Mom, you told Dad everything before he died, aren't you afraid he'll reincarnate and come back for revenge? How could there possibly be reincarnation in this world? Even if such a good thing existed, it shouldn't land on the heads of fools. Even if he did reincarnate, with an extra lifetime's worth of memories, I might still be more than a match for him. A scheming mind, deep as the sea, will eventually drown itself. It's better to be open and honest, walking together in the light."